We survived an era of spectacular, unregulated freedom. And I want you to make sure you stick around for number 4 on our list. It's something almost every single one of us did at the local grocery store or corner market that, today, would undoubtedly result in a frantic 911 call and a permanent, lifetime ban from the shop. Settle in. Let's take a trip back in time. Number 1. Riding in the bed of a pickup truck. In rural and suburban America back in the 1970s, the truck bed wasn't just for hauling 2x4s or yard waste. Oh no. That rusty metal box was the official overflow seating for the entire neighborhood. It was the primary, and sometimes only, way to get the whole gang down to the swimming hole, the Little League field, or the local drive-in movie theater. Do you remember the feeling of that incredibly hot metal wheel well pressing against the back of your bare legs? You'd be sitting back there, completely unrestrained, and the truck would hit a massive pothole. You and your friends would catch about 6 inches of air, slam back down onto the ribbed metal floor, and nobody even blinked. The wind would whip your hair around so violently that you couldn't even hear the AM radio blasting from the cab. And let's not forget the unspoken social hierarchy of the truck bed. The younger kids were usually told to sit up near the cab, pressed against the rear window. But the older, cool kids, they got the tailgate. They sat right on the edge with the tailgate down, legs casually dangling over the rushing pavement at 45 miles an hour. It was the ultimate thrill ride, our version of the 70s convertible. If you tried to pack 6 kids into a truck bed today and drive down Main Street, you'd be pulled over by 3 squad cars before you even reached the first stoplight. Coming in at number 2, we have the mobile lounge. Now, seatbelts technically existed in the 1970s, but let's be honest with ourselves. They were mostly used as a place to stuff empty gum wrappers or to dig around in hopes of finding loose change for the toll booth. Statistics show that back then, only about 10% of Americans actually bothered to wear them. The back of a station wagon wasn't considered a seating area, it was an open playground. If you were on a long family road trip, you were roaming that car. You were lying flat on the floorboards, climbing over the front bench seat, or standing right up in the middle of the car, leaning your elbows on the back of Dad's seat to get a better view of the road. And because nobody was strapped in, we relied on the most advanced piece of safety technology of the decade: the arm. You all know exactly what I'm talking about. Dad would suddenly slam on the heavy drum brakes because a squirrel ran into the road, and Mum's right arm would fly out across your chest like a human steel barricade. It didn't matter if she was holding a lit cigarette and a scalding cup of coffee. That arm shot out with the force of a hydraulic piston. That was our airbag. That was our restraint system. The car was essentially a rolling living room, and the thought of being strapped down into a 5-point harness would have felt like absolute torture to a 70s kid. Number 3 takes us up into the friendly skies. Welcome to the 30,000-foot cloud. Today, lighting up a cigarette on an airplane will get you tackled by an air marshal and permanently placed on a federal no-fly list. But in the 1970s, you could pull out a fresh pack of Marlboros and strike a match the exact second the "Fasten Seatbelt" sign went dark with a ding. I can still vividly recall that highly specific, bizarre smell. A heavy mixture of aviation jet fuel, stale recycled air, and cheap tobacco. Remember those tiny little chrome ashtrays that were built right into the armrest of every single seat? They were impossible to clean, always jammed open with wadded-up spearmint gum wrappers and peanut dust. And the absolute funniest part about all of this was the so-called non-smoking section. It was completely useless. You'd request a non-smoking seat, and they would proudly place you in row 14, while the heavy smoking section started in row 15. There was no glass wall, there was no heavy-duty ventilation separating you, just an invisible, imaginary line in the cabin that the smoke somehow magically knew not to cross. By the time you landed in Chicago, your best Sunday clothes smelled like the back room of a bowling alley. I want to pause right here and hear from you down in the comments. What is the absolute craziest place you remember people smoking back in the day? Was it sitting in the waiting room at the doctor's office? Was it right in the middle of the produce aisle at the grocery store? Leave a comment below. I'm going to be reading them all, and I know some of your answers are going to blow my mind. All right, here is number 4, the one I promised you earlier. The errand runner. It was an incredibly common practice in the 1970s. A normal Saturday afternoon chore. Your dad or your mum would be busy working under the hood of the car or fixing the sink. They would reach into their pocket, hand a 7 or 8-year-old child a crumpled $5 bill and say, "Hey, run down to the corner store and grab me a carton of Winston's and a gallon of milk." Sometimes they'd give you a handwritten note, but half the time, they didn't even bother. Do you remember the feeling of pride as you walked down the sidewalk? You felt like a trusted adult carrying out an important mission. You'd walk into that shop, the little bell above the door would jingle, and you'd walk right up to the counter. The shopkeeper wouldn't even blink. He wouldn't ask for ID. He wouldn't demand to call your parents. He'd just slide the cigarettes across the counter. You'd take the change, and as your commission for being the errand runner, you'd buy yourself a pack of cherry Fun Dip or a marathon candy bar. If you tried to send a second grader to the 7-Eleven to buy tobacco today, you'd have Child Protective Services at your door before the kid even made it back to the driveway. Number 5. The jarts era. Let's talk about lawn darts. In the 70s, toy manufacturers didn't seem terribly concerned with child safety. They were more interested in aerodynamics and heavy ballistics. Jarts were sold right there in the toy aisle at Sears or Kmart. But make no mistake, these were not toys. These were massive, weighted arrows equipped with a heavy metal spike designed to pierce the earth. The goal was to toss them high into the air and have them land inside a plastic ring placed across the yard. The sound of a jart thudding into the grass is something you never forget. But even more memorable was that terrifying, low whistling sound they made when one was falling out of the sky and headed directly toward your bare toes. We played this game at every single family 4th of July barbecue. The adults would be on the patio, deeply invested in their Pabst Blue Ribbon and conversation, while a group of 10-year-olds essentially threw medieval weaponry at each other in the deep grass. It is a genuine medical miracle that more of us weren't impaled by those things. Today, possessing a set of vintage jarts is practically treated like holding contraband. Moving on to number 6. The streetlight rule. This was the ultimate symbol of 1970s childhood autonomy. Back then, our parents had absolutely no way to track us. None. There was no GPS on our wrists, no cell phones in our pockets, no apps tracking our every movement. If you left the house on a Saturday morning at 9 a.m. and you were gone for 8 hours, you were just classified as out. You spent the day exploring creeks, building dangerous ramps out of scrap plywood, and riding miles out of your zip code. The neighborhood would be completely silent for hours. But then, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, the universal alarm clock would sound. The streetlights would buzz and hum as they turned on. That was the absolute, non-negotiable law. Be home when the streetlights come on. Suddenly, the silence of the evening was broken. You'd start to hear a chorus of mothers standing on their front porches, their voices echoing down the block, shouting out first and middle names into the twilight. "Michael Thomas! Dinner!" If you could still hear her voice, you knew you weren't far enough away from home yet. Today, a parent who lets a 9-year-old wander unsupervised for 10 hours would be reported to the police for neglect. To us, it was just called playing outside. Number 7 brings us into the classroom. Let's discuss the Board of Education. In the 1970s, the concept of school discipline was vastly different. Corporal punishment wasn't just tolerated, it was a standard, universally accepted tool. The principal's office was not a place where you were sent to talk through your big feelings or engage in restorative justice circles. If you acted up, talked back to a teacher, or got into a scuffle by the lockers, you were going to see the wooden paddle. Do you remember that long, agonizing, terrifying walk down the echoey linoleum hallway toward the principal's office? It felt like a walk to the gallows. You'd sit in that wooden chair, sweating through your shirt, while the principal calmly opened his drawer. Sometimes they would just smack that heavy wooden paddle against the top of their desk with a sharp crack, simply to intimidate you before they even used it. And the worst part? If you got paddled at school, you prayed your parents didn't find out. Because if Dad heard you got the paddle from Mr. Henderson, you were going to get it twice as bad when you got home for humiliating the family. Number 8 is one that is honestly quite jarring to think about today. It's the sheer cultural tolerance for drinking and driving. Long before organizations like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or MAD, formed in the early 1980s to change the laws, the phrase, "having one for the road," was spoken without an ounce of irony. It was horrifyingly common. People didn't necessarily view it as a malicious, reckless act. The broader culture simply hadn't grasped the lethal danger of it yet. It wasn't unusual for almost every man to have a church key bottle opener right there on his car keychain. If a police officer noticed someone swerving a bit on their way home from the tavern, it wasn't an automatic arrest with breathalyzers and handcuffs. Often, the officer would pull the driver over, recognize him as the local hardware store owner, and say, "Looks like you've had a few too many, Bill. Let me give you an escort home." The officer would literally follow the guy with his lights flashing all the way to his driveway to make sure he made it. It is a deeply sobering thought, looking back at how incredibly lucky many people were to survive that era. This brings up an interesting question, and I'd love to read your experiences. Though you remember the cultural shift when things finally started getting stricter regarding drinking and driving, was it in the late 70s for your town, or did it take until the early 80s for the police to really start cracking down? Let us know down in the comments. It's a fascinating piece of our shared history. Let's move to number 9. Lead paint and leaded gas. The 70s had a very distinct, heavy chemical signature. Lead was simply everywhere, and we bathed in it daily. It was the prime ingredient in the paint slapped onto our baby cribs, and it was the additive that kept the massive engines of our muscle cars running smooth without knocking. Do you remember that sweet, suffocatingly heavy smell hanging in the air at the gas station? That was the lead. We'd sit in the back seat with the windows rolled down while the attendant pumped the gas, breathing it all in deeply. Remember how the heavy pump handles were always completely coated in a black, oily residue? We didn't know we were breathing in neurotoxins. And back at home, we used to sit on the front porch steps, waiting for our friends, mindlessly picking at that thick, alligatoring paint that was flaking off the wood, peeling it back in satisfying strips. Today, touching that paint requires a crew in full hazmat gear, respirators, and a specialized disposal permit. Coming in at number 10 is the so-called miracle mineral. Asbestos. In the 1970s, this stuff was considered an absolute wonder of modern engineering. It was fireproof, it was an incredible insulator, and it dampened sound beautifully. They put it in the floor tiles, they wrapped the basement pipes in it, and they even used it as the fake, decorative snow we threw on the branches of our Christmas trees. But its most famous application was right above our heads, the popcorn ceiling. If you grew up in a house built or renovated in the 70s, you stared at this every night. You'd lie flat on your back in bed, staring up at those thousands of little white bumps, letting your imagination run wild trying to find shapes and faces hidden in the texture. Sometimes, you'd grab a broom handle or throw a tennis ball up there just to watch a little shower of white dust fall down onto your bedspread. We never knew that this miracle mineral was a ticking time bomb of respiratory illness. To us, it was just the defining architectural style of our bedrooms. Number 11. The era before childproof packaging. It wasn't until the Poison Prevention Packaging Act was passed in 1970 that things slowly began to change. But for most of our childhoods, accessing medication was as easy as opening a jar of peanut butter. There were no frustrating push down hard and twist while squeezing lids. Everything just had a basic, simple screw top. And the absolute biggest hazard in the medicine cabinet? St. Joseph aspirin for children. Those tiny, bright orange pills were practically lethal because they tasted incredibly good. They tasted exactly like a sweet orange candy. When you had a slight fever, your mom would give you two, but they were so delicious that the second she turned her back, you'd be sorely tempted to pull a chair up to the vanity, unscrew the cap with zero effort, and try to sneak a handful more. It is a genuine wonder that more of us didn't end up having our stomachs pumped at the local emergency room. We were lucky we made it out of the bathroom alive. Number 12 shifts focus from the kids to the adults. The workplace environment. The modern term sexual harassment didn't even exist in the legal lexicon until the mid to late 1970s. The office culture that our mothers and aunts walked into every day was a direct, unfiltered carryover from the heavy-drinking, male-dominated Mad Men era of the 1960s. You'd sit at the dinner table and watch your mom, exhausted from a day in uncomfortable heels and pantyhose, recounting stories over meatloaf. She'd tell your dad about the off-color jokes her boss made, or the inappropriate comments about her appearance that she just had to endure with a polite, forced smile. There was no human resources department to call. There was no sensitivity training. It was just chalked up to boys being boys and workplace banter. It was just how it was. Watching society evolve past that point, recognizing that behavior as completely unacceptable and illegal, has been one of the most profound and positive shifts we've witnessed in our lifetimes. Number 13 is one you can practically smell just thinking about it. The backyard burn barrel. In many suburbs, and virtually all rural areas across America, you didn't have a color-coded plastic recycling bin rolled out to the curb on Thursday mornings. Instead, you had a rusty 55-gallon metal drum sitting right in the corner of the yard. Every week, usually on a Tuesday or Wednesday night, it was time to take care of the trash. You didn't separate the cardboard from the plastic. You just gathered up the week's newspapers, the glossy magazines, the junk mail, and the plastic milk jugs, dumped them all into the barrel, and struck a long match. You'd stand there with a long stick poking the fire, watching the flickering orange glow illuminate the backyard. The heavy, acrid smell of burning paper and melting plastic would drift through every screen door in the neighborhood. If you fired up a barrel full of plastic trash in a suburban backyard today, the EPA and the local fire marshal would be pulling up your driveway with sirens blaring in under 10 minutes. Number 14. This was the absolute pinnacle of luxury travel for a 70s kid, sleeping in the way back on long road trips. When the family loaded up for a grueling 3-day haul down to Florida or out to the Grand Canyon, parents didn't buckle their children into rigid, foam-padded 5-point harness car seats. Instead, Dad would fold the back seats of the station wagon completely flat, creating a massive cargo area. Mum would throw down a thin foam mattress pad, unroll 2 sleeping bags, toss in some pillows, and tell the kids to get comfortable. You'd lie flat on your back, completely unrestrained, staring up through the slanted rear window. You'd watch the stars slowly track across the sky and count the towering streetlights as they passed over you in a hypnotic rhythm, while the massive V8 engine hummed along the interstate at 70 miles per hour. Honestly, it was the deepest, most peaceful sleep you'd ever get, despite the fact that one sudden tap on the brakes would have sent you sliding forward into the dashboard. Let's do a roll call down in the comments. Who else spent their childhood road trips completely horizontal in the way back? And more importantly, what was your family car? Did you have an Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser? A Ford Country Squire with the fake wood siding? Shout it out in the comments right now. And finally, number 15. We end with the exact moment the toy industry was forced to change forever. In 1978, the absolute hottest toy on the market was the Colonial Viper ship from the hit television show Battlestar Galactica. If you had this toy, you were instantly the absolute king of the block. It was an incredible ship, but its main feature was that it fired these tiny, spring-loaded red plastic missiles. They shot fast, and they shot far. Those little red missiles were highly coveted, but tragically, they were the exact diameter of a child's windpipe. In late 1978, a young boy tragically choked on one of those missiles. Mattel instantly recalled the toy, and suddenly the era of wild, unregulated toy manufacturing came to a screeching halt. That singular event led to the creation of the choke testing cylinder and the strict small parts warning labels we see plastered on every single toy box today. The Colonial Viper marked the exact dividing line between the play at your own risk era and the safety first era. Looking back at all of this, the lack of seat belts, the lead paint, the roaming free in the streets, it truly feels like a miracle that we're all still sitting here, able to talk about it together. We lived in a time of high risk, there is no denying that. But man, did it come with a high reward. We grew up in a world where we learned the hard way exactly how things worked. We didn't have protective knee pads, we didn't have high-tech car seats, and we didn't have cell phones to bail us out of trouble. But we had a fierce sense of independence and a spirit of pure, unadulterated adventure that is incredibly hard to find in today's highly sanitized, overly structured world. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a grandfather now. I know that these safety laws and regulations exist today to protect our grandkids, and ultimately, that is a profoundly good thing. We want them to be safe. But deep down, there is a part of us, the part that remembers the 70s, that will always fiercely miss the feeling of the warm summer wind whipping through our hair in the back of that rusty old pickup truck. I want to pass the question over to you. Looking at this list of 15 things, which one do you honestly miss the absolute most? And on the flip side, which one are you actually relieved is finally illegal? Let's keep this conversation going down in the comment section below. I read them all, and your memories always bring a smile to my face. If this video brought back a fond memory for you today, please hit that like button. It really helps out the channel. Make sure you subscribe to join our little growing community of history and nostalgia lovers. And do me a favor, share this video with your brothers, your sisters, or your old neighborhood friends. Remind them of exactly what you all managed to survive together. Until next time, take care of yourselves and keep those beautiful memories alive.